I'm Brad Barham, a University of Wisconsin-Madison professor. I teach and conduct research on economic and environmental issues in the United States and Latin America. I focus on the intersection of agriculture and sustainable development. This video examines the weird economics of water in agricultural areas served by the Colorado River system. 70 to 80% of the river's water is utilized for agricultural purposes. And so it's agricultural users, farmers, who are going to have to find ways to dramatically reduce their use of this finite resource.
To understand the options and nuances involved in a significant reduction of agricultural water use, we start by exploring why the weird economics of agriculture in the Colorado River Basin both incentivize the widespread production of water-intensive crops across the region and fail to reward crops and land uses that support soil, water, and other conservation outcomes. In the Southwest, the United States, and around the world, we underprice water, soil, air, and other environmental services. This leads to overuse relative to the social value of these environmental services. This inefficiency story drives water scarcity in the Southwest. It also drives water quality degradation in the Midwest and other negative outcomes of deforestation, habitat destruction, and biodiversity loss associated with agriculture around the world. It is a problem almost everywhere you look, from fossil fuel use and climate change issues to water misallocation. As in the other water videos, we open with some weird economics observations and then explain them using economic concepts. They range from water prices and crop choices to how water conservation solutions will need to be adapted to local situations, because simple solutions do not work under varying agricultural and economic situations. The first three observations tell the story of high water use in agriculture and the inefficiency this generates for the Southwest and the United States. What the first three observations overlook is the gains farmers have made in improving their efficiency of irrigation methods and water use. We come back to this point as a fourth observation. The first three are: water prices for farming from the Colorado River diversions tend to be much lower than the prices faced by other users and much, much lower than the cost of alternative sources of water. The second is lower water prices encourage the cultivation of water-intensive crops in arid environments, especially alfalfa, hay, and grass, which are the main crops grown across the basin. Third, while profitable for farmers, widespread cultivation of these forage crops creates a huge gap between what is privately profitable and what is socially beneficial in an era of water scarcity. Most farmers along the Colorado River Basin get water for cheap, based on historical or senior rights to fixed allotments of water and the historical practice of tying water prices to the cost of conveyance from their local irrigation districts. They get a fixed supply of water at low cost, in other words. Senior rights mean that other users, like farmers who arrive later, big cities, and tribes that didn't get their water rights adjudicated until much later, either get what's left or have to buy water from other sources at a much higher cost. We depict this economic allocation story with a graph that looks like the following. It is explained in more detail in the Weird Economics of Water in Urban Areas video, and what you should notice here, though, is that the supply is fixed for water for farmers, and it's based on these senior rights, and the prices they get or have to pay for that water are P rural on the graph, while urban users face the price P urban, a much higher price. We met with 3 successful farmers in California and Arizona, all of whom came from families that had been farming in the region since early in the 20th century. All 3 specialized in forage crops, especially alfalfa and other grains like wheat. 2 grew cotton. Yet their situations differed a lot with respect to their water access and proximity to urban locations. One was Ed Hale, a leader of the Imperial County Farm Bureau in California, who owns about 6,500 acres and manages around 8,500 acres of cropland in the Imperial Valley. All of his water comes from the Imperial Irrigation District that pumps water from the All-American Canal of the Colorado River system. Ed mostly grows alfalfa and other forage crops. He showed us the ins and outs of alfalfa cultivation and water conservation using a variety of irrigation and land management methods. One size irrigation method does not fit all fields or crops. That was his punchline. In this next clip, Ed explains how this relates to the land, but also the high salinity of the water they get from the Colorado River.
We use quite a few different irrigation methods depending on the crop, the soil type, and the particular field. There's not a one-size-fits-all. You've got to have quite a few tools in your toolbox and use the right one for the right application. Historically, Imperial Valley, because of its layout, we've used flood irrigation. It's very efficient. We luckily can use gravity irrigation. We don't have to pump it, so there's no need to do that. The whole system runs on gravity.
The second farmer was Ronald Rayner, one of three brothers who have farmed in Goodyear and the Gila River region of Arizona, as well as in Central California, for many decades. Ronald showed us around his wheat and alfalfa fields, where some of their irrigation water came from a municipal recycling plant that sends water past their farm on the way to a nuclear power plant where it is used again for cooling. Ronald and the next generation of the Rayner family were also in the process of selling much of their Goodyear farmland for commercial and residential development and transferring their farming operations to a more remote location, and this is not an uncommon story for farmers throughout the Southwest. The third farmer was Dan Thielander from Pinal County, south of the Phoenix area. Dan grows alfalfa, wheat, and cotton, among other crops, on around 5,000 acres. He has faced extreme water shortages in the past 2 years as part of the drought contingency plan of the Colorado River. He reduced his land in production by half in 2022 and looks like he may reduce again by half in 2023, so from 5,000 acres to 1,250.
2022, on our farm, we went from 4 acre feet to 1.93 acre feet. If you're in a deeper pumping zone with fewer pumps, then like a lot of the farms that we farm, we're getting a lot of mitigation water and not much pump water.
And when you're fallowing, are you getting any payment for the land that's fallowed?
We have crop insurance, and so we're going to get some prevented planting through crop insurance.
Across the Colorado River Basin, the main crops are forages, especially alfalfa, hay, and grass. Also some grains, mostly wheat and corn, and then cotton. The forage crops account for more than 70% of the land and water use, which along with Ag's 70 to 80% share means that more than half of the Colorado River water goes essentially for livestock forage rations. It is important to add that winter vegetables are the dominant crops in the Yuma region of Arizona and parts of the nearby Imperial Valley, where up to 90% of the U.S. winter lettuce crops are grown. Frequently, the cutbacks of water to agriculture are equated with giving up winter vegetables. But this need not be so, given the huge role played by livestock feed in the overall ag, water, and land use portfolio. Third, while profitable for farmers, widespread cultivation of these forage crops creates a huge gap between what is privately profitable and what is socially beneficial in an era of water scarcity. Gabi Lozada, an economist from the University of Utah, describes this well and in more detail in the overview video of this module.
So the profit for growing alfalfa in Utah is around $400 an acre, whereas for other grains, it's around $250, so quite a bit less. So with alfalfa, if you give it water, you can get several cuttings a year. But for other crops like wheat, you have to plant in the spring and wait all growing season for the harvest. And the limited length of a growing season in Utah makes it just harder to make money with those kind of crops.
Water-intensive forage crops can be the most profitable in an arid environment when water is cheap. Now, it helps, too, that demand is strong nationally and globally for forage crops, especially alfalfa. For years, Saudi Arabia has grown or purchased alfalfa in the American Southwest so they can conserve their own precious water. Most of their potable water comes from dozens of desalination facilities.
Almarai, one of the largest dairies in the world, recently bought 15 square miles of farmland. ABC 15's Joe Bartels went to that facility today. And Joe, this farm uses a lot of water for its irrigation.
Yeah, Steve, it could be billions of gallons of water. It turns out exporting crops is a fairly common thing in Arizona.
This extreme case is relevant to our discussion because it highlights the issue of whether the social value of water in the Southwest is the same as what is privately profitable for farmers with senior rights to cheap water. And the answer is no. The social value of those crops would include many other factors: what they do for the soil, the air, carbon dioxide emissions and sequestration, and their potential value in alternative water uses. Once those factors are added into the story, it is not so pretty. Higher water costs elsewhere in the Southwest and degradation of the Colorado River environment are a result of agriculture's excessive use of water. Despite a suite of agricultural policies and programs run by U.S. agencies, especially the United States Department of Agriculture and its National Resource Conservation Service, overall incentives to farmers do not sufficiently reward crop choices and land uses that support better soil, water, and other conservation outcomes. As a result, farmers tend to lock in to defend their profits and previous investments in equipment, information, and knowledge. But we have more to discuss and consider before we jump to conclusions about what to do. Our fourth observation is that while Southwest farmers have made significant gains in water conservation technologies over the years, these gains have not been game changers in terms of overall water use. Those gains come from optimizing water flows across farm fields, increasing the precision of water use through sensors, and mixing and matching different irrigation methods.
There are a lot of things that we can do. We're doing many of them. We need to do more. We have some programs that are being tried in other areas, and here where we have a water conservation program where we provide water to our thirsty coastal plain neighbors by putting in extraordinary conservation measures that would be more than a farm could ordinarily pay for. And the grand bargain is that they would pay for those conservation measures. In turn, they get the water that's saved, and we continue to be able to produce the food and fiber that we've always produced.
Essentially, what Ed just explained is that conservation gains in irrigation and precision management have allowed farmers to divert some agricultural water to urban users, especially from the three main irrigation districts in and near the Imperial Valley, while maintaining similar cropping patterns of water-intensive crops. Our fifth observation is that while forage crops dominate agricultural activity and water use in the Colorado River Basin, they are also produced under varying conditions and with distinct alternative crop options across the basin. This means that adaptive farm management strategies to reduce water use could be very different across the region. To help us develop these last two observations, we introduce a fourth farmer, Paul Bruchez from Colorado. Paul has been an active leader in the pursuit of adaptive management strategies in a watershed in the Colorado Rockies that has faced severe water use limitations for more than a decade. He's also currently one of the leaders at the statewide level in helping to forge Colorado's strategy for pursuing sustainable agricultural and environmental outcomes. He leads a local farmers network that is studying the water use and rotational fallowing management options for alfalfa and other crops.
So we received a grant in early 2000, and by the beginning of summer season 2000, we were drying out deliberately just under 1,000 acres of irrigated ag land up here, all to be studied on the consumptive use side of things. The other critical part of the study is the recovery of these crops. There's information and literature out there, but they're all pretty small scale studies. So wanted to do it at full ranch scale kind of impacts to how producers come back into production in a recovery format after taking, a year of non-water use. Soil health matters a lot as far as water savings and plant resiliency. Forage type and soil health matter a lot to recovery.
Right.
So where we have drought resilient plants and relatively healthy soil conditions, they came back from a response of a full season fallow in one particular case at 102% of its historical production.
There's three main takeaways from Paul's comments. First, rotational fallowing is likely to be a centerpiece of significantly reducing water use across the basin, but land that's been taken out for several seasons will be much harder to bring back. Second, to do rotational fallowing effectively and productively takes high-quality management that is adapted to local conditions. Forage types and soil conditions matter a lot. They have to be matched well. Third, this adaptive management approach takes time, effort, and investment by farmers. If you put all of this together, agricultural policy aimed at building sustainable agricultural futures with farmer buy-in is likely to require substantive payments for both the lost income from less water and the transition costs of taking that land and water use in a substantially different direction. Growing conditions across the Colorado River Basin vary from short growing seasons in the mountains of Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico to almost full-year cultivation schedules in the deserts of California and parts of Arizona. Differences in growing conditions and location fundamentally shape market opportunities for farmers across the region in some similar and some distinct ways. Market opportunities can also vary based on proximity to urban markets or infrastructure for processing and distribution of products. And across the basin, farmers learn from each other and work together in distinct ways depending on many factors, including how close they are to one another, how large their farms are, what types of challenges they have faced in the past, and efforts by farmer organizations or others to bring them together to figure out adaptive management strategies. All of these nuances underscore the need to have farmers and their local organizations and supporting institutions involved in figuring out how they can best adapt to the need to substantially reduce water use for the foreseeable future. Farmer knowledge and experience must lead the way to identify locally effective strategies. In other words, agriculture must be part of the solution, yet getting agreement on these cuts from the states representing these farmers will be tough. Ann Castle underscores this challenge.
It was my understanding, not that California was holding back, but that all of the lower basin states, but particularly California and Arizona, were having trouble finding
Ways to do it.
acre feet a year. Meaning they were willing to compensate, but they weren't finding willing farmers. And part of the reason is, at least as I understand it, and I am not deeply embedded in these issues, but alfalfa prices are through the roof. And so farmers can make a ton more money if they use that water for irrigation and sell the crops than they could with the compensation being offered. I think that state water managers have a tightrope to walk because they know full well that that everybody needs to reduce water usage because the water isn't there. There isn't enough water to keep supplying the uses that we've made from the river. But it's also their sworn duty to protect the interests of water users in their states.
So just offering a $320 per acre foot voluntary conservation payment may not have many or even any takers. The price will have to be closely related to the opportunity of cost of water to farmers if it's going to be voluntary. So if alfalfa prices are high, then water prices are going to have to be high in order to attract voluntary transfers or reductions. Another take-home message is that farmers across the basin do recognize that, quote-unquote, everything is on the table with respect to water use in the West. Listen to what Spencer Gibbons, the executive director of the Utah Farm Bureau, told us when we asked about the way his organization is engaging in discussions about water in the West.
Seems like everything's on the table without a doubt. It's the $100 million question as an organization of how do we help our members? We are currently hosting what we're calling our water school, where we're trying to tackle all of these issues that are facing agriculture and water, because it's just become so, we've been dry. We know we're dry. We live in the desert and we have done for 200 years. But the problem is the demand on the resource just continues to grow. As an organization, we're trying to do a couple things. One, inform our farmers how to engage in that discussion so that they can do everything they can to protect the water that they have. But two, the very nature of water law, Western water law, we refer to it as Western water law, I think is being questioned right now. We are trying to figure out how do we protect our farmers so they can stay in business, because if they don't have water, they're not going to be in business.
Note that Spencer also pointed to his organization's efforts to inform farmers of the water crisis situation, getting them up to speed in what he called water schools, and then engaged in local watershed councils where decisions will hopefully be tailored to local conditions. Our last take-home message is that the Colorado River crisis cannot simply rest at the foot of farmers because they are the major water users. They have to be active participants in a collaborative approach to how to reduce water use. They will need probably two types of compensation: short-term payment for reducing water use dramatically in the years ahead, and longer-term investment support to move land use or their agricultural activities and operations to new crops, even new places, and they will need help with management strategies in accordance with that reduction in water use. We pursue these issues further in two policy educational videos. One is on technology and policy options for agriculture. The other is on payment mechanisms to support sustainable and equitable outcomes in rural areas, not just for farmers, but also for communities that depend on agriculture for their viability and vitality.